I'm here. My name is Alexandre. I'm here with my colleague André Dudemaine. This week we have Angela Sterritt, who is our guest for this week. So Angela, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah. Amasa, my name is Angela Sterritt. My Gitxsan name is Lu Algia Zumkbist, which means woman who works in television and radio. My grandfather was groomed to be the hereditary chief of the House of we-GAK, which is a house group that I now belong to legally as of last June. And that is from the Wolf Clan. And my community is Gitnamax, and I'm Gitxsan. And I'm currently living on the stolen territories of the Sḵwx, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh, also known as Vancouver.
Okay. Good afternoon, Angela. It's really a pleasure to have you with us. I just finished to read your book, Unbroken, and well, I hesitate to call this wonderful work a book. It's like a living thing. I think when we read it, we are moved by the heart throb, the living heart throb that's here. I haven't could dare to say that this is not paper. This is flesh. This is really, really, really strong. And one, I think the really one of the you wrote somewhere that you hesitated to blend your own story with the stories of all those missing or murdered Aboriginal women you tell in the book. And this is exactly what makes the book so strong. I think this how you, I wouldn't say blend because it's already intertwined, but how you are telling your own story alongside the story of the stolen sisters, as another book called Murder and Missing Aboriginal Women. So how finally did you decide to have those both aspects all together in the book?
Yeah. So I think when I was first writing the book, one of the struggles that I had was that there wasn't really a model for the type of book that I was thinking of writing, which was part investigation or part investigative journalism, looking at the murders and the disappearances of thousands of Indigenous women and girls in this country, and part memoir, part my own story of surviving violence. And I think the struggle was also that I didn't want my story to take away from their story, from those who didn't survive violence, be it systemic violence or it be murder. In many cases, I found out through my book that it's not like the police say that it's Indigenous people killing Indigenous women. It is mostly white men who are killing Indigenous women, and in many cases, strangers. And so I think that struggle came from also a deep place of not wanting my story to overshadow theirs, but also it's difficult to tell your story. It's difficult, especially as a journalist, to put your story out there. We're told not to do that. It's in our training. We don't put ourselves in the story. But I think my agent, Samantha Haywood, and my editor, Jennifer Krall, really gently nudged me to do that because they said, your story will be an anchor to help guide people through this larger story of colonial violence in Canada. And I think it's really important to, remind people, especially Indigenous youth, that don't be afraid to take your own path, even if it's not been done before, because, this book has been nominated for awards. It has done really well in Canada. And so, although it was an uncomfortable journey in many ways, I'm really heartened to see the reception that Unbroken has had in the world.
Yeah. Also, at the beginning of the book, when you speak at the Highway 16, now called the Highway of Tears, you remember, because when we hear it, well, especially here in the East, we see, of course, the road, and this is what we have in mind. But you remember that, well, along Prince Rupert, this is fantastic landscape, that is the land of several indigenous nations. So it is not, and the line of the road is follow the rivers that are the living part of this landscape, of this traditional territory. That means a lot to, of course, that means everything for the Aboriginal cultures there. And I was thinking that this also part of the strong narrative is that this scar, that the highway is in the middle of those natural land, is also correspond also in a scar, in many scars and wounds in the soul of the First Nations. So there is also here a larger connection that true crime story wouldn't have been able to do. And again, how this inspiration, that's a really strong spirit that certainly motivates your writing. How it arrived.
Yeah, I think at the time of when I was writing the book, I was inspired a lot by I think the fight, right? The fight for our voices to be heard, the fight for awareness to be shone on this horrific tragedy across Canada, the fight for my place to belong in the world, the fight for Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit people, men and boys to be accepted around any table, any given table. And just seeing, books, videos, films, docuseries, podcasts really look at this area through a lens of whiteness, through a lens of, just horrible things have happened here. And, going back there, traveling that route, that I had traveled many times before, and saying that's not what is here. And wanting people to open their eyes and see the beauty of the land, the beauty of the people, the beauty of community, the beauty of Indigenous laws, the beauty of diversity and distinction of nations in the area, the beauty of, I don't like using this word too much, but of resilience, of overcoming something tremendous and continuing. I spoke to a group of young Indigenous people the other day, and I said, don't forget, there's things that they can never take away, right? They can never take away our self-worth, but they also can't take away our culture. They tried. They tried to take our culture. Mm-hmm. They tried to take our language. They tried to take many things from us, but they cannot. They were very successful in taking our land, which, people are definitely taking back, but there's things that they attempted to destroy that they could not. And so I wanted people to see this area for the beauty that it is. And I wanted people to see Indigenous people through the multi-dimensional lens that we exist in. We don't exist as just in our tragedy. We don't exist just in a romanticized vision of who we are. We are human beings with multi-dimensional lives. And so I wanted people to see that and to remember and go, oh, right, this is who we are. This is who they are. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a good part of what we are or what we have become today is the different, the various traumas that have been affected us through colonialism, and this has been a lot internalized, and often people are not at ease to tell or to speak about those inner mixed sentiments, and I think one of the theses I think is there in your book is that those traumas has to be told, has to be part of the narrative if we want to go over them. This is how stories can become history, and then we can pass to the next phase. Am I right?
That's really brilliant that you said that, actually, because right now I'm working on my second book about men as I raise a young man. My son just turned 13. And one of the things that really was profound for me to witness was a man that I spoke with in Toronto a few months ago. And he spoke for the first time in his life to a public audience. Very brave of him to do this, about some pretty brutal abuse that he experienced, sexual abuse as a young boy by priests. And it was something he didn't expect. It was unscripted. He just decided he was going to say this. And I saw him off stage and I said, you know, your talk was my favorite. Like, that was so brave and courageous for you to do that. And he said, I feel so different now because the shame is no longer mine. I took it off my shoulders. And I think as Indigenous people, in particular men, because in many ways men and boys are told you can't share emotion, you can't shed a tear, you can't, you know, the only acceptable emotion is anger, and you can't share, you know, traumas that have happened to you. Even though that shame is not theirs, they carry it because it's like in the form of a secret, and it lives in their bodies, in all of our bodies, when we carry that type of pain. And so it really like shook me into what you were just saying. These traumas need to be told so they are in the history, so they don't get repeated again, but also so this isn't a weight that we carry. You know, a lot of the things that happened during colonization are the problems of systems, right? Whether it be residential school, the foster care system, the 60s scoop, violence against Indigenous women and girls. These are structures and systems that were not ours to carry. You know, as someone who is part white, I have white on my mom's side. My mom, I forgot to say that my mom is from Bell Island, Newfoundland, with English and Irish roots. My dad also has Irish in him. And so, you know, people always ask, well, why are you so outspoken? Well, I take that privilege and power to heart. And it's something that I take seriously in ensuring that my ancestors on that side are held accountable through my actions. But going back to what you said about not carrying that trauma, I just think that's so important in this juncture of our lives to share stories that have created harm. And I think the way that you said that is just so beautiful, so that they stay, or that they become history, that they don't become part of our story moving forward. We can create joy, we can create love, we can live in all the abundance that we deserve to live within.
And also there is a complexity, which is certainly true of every human being. We cannot be a catalog in only one aspect of our life. But when we are speaking about Indigenous women, there is many layers, and you are yourself a good example of this complexity. You are, on one side, the daughter of a traditional leader's family. Your uncle is famous because of the, I don't know how to pronounce, a Delgagut case, which is a big historic win at the Supreme Court of Canada for Aboriginal rights. He wrote books, but you have been in foster care, you have been a street kid, and you have reconnect with the school later in your life, and you became a journalist and a writer too. So this is interesting to see how you were at a point completely out, and how in your struggle to take a hold of your life, you are all of a sudden a famous writer. That's really in itself a very good story.
Yeah, I think when I first started writing this book, one of the people who really pushed me to tell this story was Marcy McDonald, who's a journalist herself. And she said, this is a story about, I think it's kind of cliche to say this, but triumph over tragedy, right? Or the hero's journey. I think somebody told me that all stories are hero's journeys. And we're all, a hero to a degree in our own stories, maybe despite our choices or because of our choices. But and I think, it's interesting what you just said. Like, I'm a famous writer. It just doesn't resonate. I think, like, as Indigenous people, I think things that outsiders don't really see is that we're just so connected. So when we show up, whether we're like famous writer or, community superstar, or maybe a former inmate, or a current street kid, or a basketball player, like, we're all connected and we're all kin, and we treat each other just the same. So when we show up in community together, there's just that sense of community love, no matter who you are. And that's what I love about, being away from media now and just being able to be a part of my own community. There's no weirdness about status or status quo or, what you're bringing to the table. You are you are a valued member of this community. And for me, that's, my East Vancouver community that I grew up here, my East Vancouver Indigenous community. And so it's weird for me to be like, I think like, for me, the purpose, because I was like, what's the purpose? I've never been about famous people. I've never attached myself to people or brands in that way. But I'm like, what's the purpose of me having, being known in the world? And I think, for one, it's to role model for other Indigenous people. The other purpose is to be able to use my voice to be able to shed awareness on a larger scale. The other part is just letting people know you can do whatever you want. You can travel whatever road that you choose. You can dream big. And so, it's definitely not, I still haven't, it's weird when I go out, everyone's like, are you Angela Sterritt, or who are you? And I'm just like, I'm just Ange. And people get annoyed with me. They're like, no, and I'm like, no, it's okay. I can be a nobody in the world. It's okay. We're all the same, but definitely lots of lessons in humility.
Also, I'm just looking at the beginning of the book, and you have several pages, and this is all tribute. We have all the name of those missing or murdered Aboriginal girls, sometimes very young, and women. And at the end, I was looking for some names that there were, and then I thought, well, this is only in BC.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you had put all the names, it would have taken the whole book.
Yeah.
To have covered Canada. That's really a terrible tragedy. And I don't think most of the people size the dimension of this oppression, this very murderous oppression. And certainly your book helped. And I don't know. I think when I closed the book, I said more should be done to give the scale, the historical scale of this drama. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I could have taken up the whole book. I guess I didn't think about doing that because I wanted the book to be focused, I guess, like really zooming in on these particular stories. And maybe I didn't want that, but that's the way that it panned out. And I became very close to the family members, which is very much so against the tenets of journalism, right? Which is you keep this distance. And I wanted this book to be very different than that. I wanted to build relationships. I wanted the storytelling to be as collaborative as possible. And I wanted them to guide the trajectory. Do you want this to be strength-based? Do you want this to shed awareness? Do you want this to tell those horrible details? And I really tried to protect, the family members as much as I could. There were stories in there that were a lot longer. In one of the cases, I think I came very close to the murderer. And it became very complicated. And one of the men that I was talking to was incredible. The Indigenous man became incredibly traumatized by just talking to me. And so we made a decision not to put his sister's story in there. She wasn't the murderer or anything like that, but yeah. And so yeah, I decided to keep that list centered on BC because those are the stories that I was telling. And it's kind of like a microcosm for the larger picture, right? I think it was also really important for me too, like for, those letters, like beside each woman's name, were they killed by a serial killer? Were they killed by a white man? Were they killed by an Indigenous man or somebody else? And to show people that it's largely white men doing the killing. And I think, you've read the book. It sounds like you've read it, with a fine-tooth comb. Thank you so much for paying it that much attention. But I get asked this all the time, who's killing the Indigenous women? Because there was a myth put out there by the police, by the RCMP, that, it's Indigenous men killing Indigenous women. And that's not the reality. That's not the truth. And that information that was put out there by the RCMP has never been backed by data, has never been backed by a formal report, has never been backed by facts. It was just put out there in a media speech and was never talked about again. And that's the danger of media. That's the danger of information being put out there without facts, without data. So in large part, this list was about honoring the women and seeing the women and girls as, more than just a name, but, a face, someone with a story, someone who had a life, a beautiful life that was taken far too early. But in part, it was also to showcase like who murders Indigenous women and girls. No, it's not Indigenous men. I think in those lists that I created, one was from the Highway of Tears murders. And the media often says there's been 18 women and girls killed or taken from the highway, which is not the case, as my list shows, but also from the Picton farm. But it was to show that the murders are are not happening, are not being done by Indigenous men at all. I think there was one Indigenous man who had killed 3 women on the highway at Tears.
And also what is stunning is how generally the police, well, mainly the CMP, but other local police services, just botched the search after the disappearance of women. They really think that, well, it's just another Aboriginal woman that get away on a alcoholic binge, and we don't have to care about the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that goes on still today. So we hear a lot about people building an awareness about residential school, which is great, but it's like, this is like a long time after the fact. People should have been aware of that a long time ago. But I think one of the outstanding deficits that continues to this day is the police's inability to believe, Indigenous family members when they come forward and say, my daughter, my sister, my mom is missing, and them going back to those, historical norms where they just say, oh, we think she's out of town. We know where she is. And it's interesting because I point to this in the book as well. I think this happens more, when it comes to Indigenous women, when it comes to Black women, when it comes to women of color, but it happens across the board, I think. And I have an example in the book of even, I think it was from the 70s or 80s, where a young boy went missing and was possibly kidnapped and all of this. And they just said, oh, I think he ran away. So this is something that historically has happened, but it continues today even more so when it comes to Indigenous women and girls. And I believe that comes down to the reality that there's this sentiment that we don't matter in this society. Unfortunately, the tragedy of women going missing or being murdered still continues to this day. Oh, you're on mute.
Yes. You wrote somewhere that the being Aboriginal and being a woman is a risk. It's really true. We had recently in Quebec one of those moments de vérité, truth moment, with Joyce Echaquan, a young Atikamekw woman from the same community than my colleague Alexandre. And she was really mistreated in hospital. But happily, she started her phone. And it has been recorded, her death under racist insult has been recorded. And without that reflex to push the button, it would have been, another woman who died in hospital. And now, even after this dramatic case, you have the Prime Minister of Quebec who said, no, there is no systemic racism in Quebec.
Wow.
Well, it's not possible. Yeah. And this was the same in BC when they were receiving information about Picton. The name was there in the report of the police, but there was no adequate follow-up after those first information. So he could go on killing more women. That's really a terrible story.
And I think there's more layers to peel back from that story about different people being involved in that entire apparatus at the Picton farm. And I think people are looking into that more as we speak. You know, I always tell people the truth always comes out. From my life, what I've seen, it's very rare that people just take things to their grave. A lot of times people are held accountable when, you know, they want to be living in comfort at that time in their life more than any time in their life. You know, you look at the Harry Weinsteins or the Nygaards of the world, right? And they're held accountable when it's very late in their life. And Picton is in jail, but I think there's a lot of people that see that story as there's a lot of people who weren't held accountable in that story. And, you know, I think the police got off pretty, you know, with a slap on the wrist. There were a lot of reports, but a lot of those reports as well say it wasn't systemic racism. It wasn't that. You look at the authors of these reports, right? Who are they? I mean, Wally Opal is, you know, he's not a white man, but he's very invested in colonial systems, right? Colonial justice systems. And so I think there's a lot more to peel back. And I think it's interesting that you brought up Joyce Echaquan, because that has happened in BC. I just did a story. My last story at CBC was about a boy who died strapped down to a hospital bed. Just horrific, but like, where's the accountability there? And it's interesting that you brought up Joyce Echaquan's name in the context of MMIWG, because I mean, essentially she was murdered in a form, but who's held accountable for that? And how many others are, you know, essentially murdered by these systems, but no one is held accountable at the end of the day. If we want to see change in the society, if we want systemic racism to be gone, then there needs to be consequences for people's actions. And we don't see enough of that, in my opinion. We can do all the educating and all the training that we want, but at the end of the day, what's going to make people stop being racist or stop being violent? It's consequences.
And for me, the book is still going on, because I just, as I do each morning, look at the news between two chapters. And then there is today a news that with biological evidence in Manitoba, they have caught the murder of an Aboriginal woman called Crystal Saunders. And she was killed in 2007. And last week, the murderer was arrested, because with the new tools, here, what you said is completely true. The truth is coming even 15 years later. And that's interesting. But at the same time, another news is today begin a trial in Val-d'Or. The Sď, the Sûreté du Québec, the provincial police, is suing Radio-Canada, the French CBC, because they have they have repercuted the story of abuse by Anishinaabe, an Anishinaabe woman by policemen of the Sď. And they say this is slanderous, and they are not. So, of course, the Anishinaabe woman, they have no money, no nothing. So it doesn't worth suing them directly. So they take Radio-Canada. And I was thinking to send your book to the judge. This is a brief of amicus, as they say in lawyer language. And reading that book, you can think what is the credibility of the police. So it is really striking how this book that goes deep in the story, the whole colonial system. And now, just in 1 hour, one day, we can pin some news that are related almost directly to the facts you bring into the books. So you can have, I think, a re-edited, unbroken book, twice the number of pages of this one in next year, if you want.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm doing my next book on men. And I think this is really needed. I think as Indigenous people, so I've been interviewing a lot of men, and it's been really interesting examining also. I just did, I don't know if you go to my Instagram or my TikTok, I just did this video about white feminism. And I think a lot of Indigenous people, even historically and today, we are not looking for equality. We're looking for balance. We're looking for harmony. And, that's something that we've always strived for in our communities. That's why we were able to protect the environment, protect the children, protect the women, protect the climate, because we strive for this notion of balance rather than equality. Like, we don't want to be on the same level as each other. So looking at this new path of men, I think it's just so needed right now. I think we could talk about women and girls all day, and I think we do. As Indigenous people, we're really good at talking about that issue in particular, but we don't talk about the needs of men. They're kind of left aside. And I think it's a conversation that's really important right now. And it's also, it's been inspired, or I've been motivated by, again, tragedy, and looking at the opioid deaths, which 70 to 80% are men, and that's all across the board, all men. And so I just think we could talk about women and girls, and we need to continue this conversation 100%. But I think as Indigenous people, we need to look at the whole of our communities to go back to that place of wholeness, if that makes sense.
Also, I will come back to this, what you say, but I think another thing that is important in your book, and this is how an Indigenous journalist can make a difference, how certain words were taboo. We were not supposed to use it, like the word survivors, when we speak about people that have gone through the residential school systems. And that's interesting, because now it is accepted. And I am old enough to remember when you were telling not only survivor, you were telling Indigenous arts, they were telling Indigenous art, no, craft, but not art.
Right.
That was all the language, the colonial prejudice was there, and it was often in the media in the name of the ethic of journalism. You can, if you say survivors, you are biased. And another word that is also still not completely, but very difficult to get into the official or the general speech is genocide. And here again, I think your book is interesting because you connect all those specific cases of missing or murdered Aboriginal women. And this is part of an historical fabric that led us, leaded us there. So that's really we have still, when we speak about narrative sovereignty, we still have to get some reality words in the speech. Decolonization and genocide are a good example.
Yeah.
And I know you had this fight inside the media you work with, especially CBC, and as living in Quebec, in the French-speaking Quebec, it was somehow a revenge to say, wow, they say it's Quebec that we where the medias are close to indigenous issues. No, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's so interesting that you said that, because I was interviewed by a Quebec journalist. I was interviewed by Julie Caron, who was amazing. Absolutely loved her. But I was interviewed by another one, and I actually had to walk out of the interview. It was just so, I just felt like I was treated like, it's interesting to be on the other side of things now, right? Because the family members always told me, like, you're so different. You're so different. And they would give me all of these stories for the first time that they'd ever shared them. So being on the other side, yeah, I was interviewed by a Quebec journalist, and it was awful. I was just treated like, it was just so lazy, right? It was like, you're going to do all the work here. You're going to do all my labor for me. You're going to tell me how these systems work. And it was the most bizarre thing, and very trauma driven. Like, tell me what it was like to hitchhike. And I just said, no, I'm not telling you that. But I think the media has a big problem, right? It's a colonial institution, just like the hospitals, just like the police. We all have the same problems in these institutions, the exact same ones, whether it comes to accountability or consequences or deep, deep, deep levels of institutional racism that they were built upon, right? We know the RCMP was literally built to protect settlers from the indigenous people or the Indians. Media was built on the premise of colonial violence. So many of the stories that we have done historically as media have promoted colonial violence in many different ways. So there's a problem there, and it saddens me, because for many years I worked so hard in hopes of changing the system. I really wanted to tell the truth about Indigenous people, and I did what I could, and I don't regret a thing. But to think someone's going in there without the same fight that I had, you're told assimilate or leave. And if you refuse, you're going to be working 12 to 20 times harder than any other journalist, any other white journalist inside the newsroom. Always. That made me a really good journalist by having to follow those rules. But it gave me an incredible burnout, and that I'm still healing from. And it wasn't the stories that I did that were very traumatic. It was the racism, the constant racism in, 2023, constantly being told your stories don't matter. You don't belong here. We don't believe you. And then, we talk about microaggressions, but a lot of times, Black, Indigenous, and people of color experience just flat out racism in the newsroom, right? Or in any institution, just slurs and constant belittling, and it's continual, and it shouldn't be that way. Now that I'm away from media, it feels, I was just telling my partner, like, I can just have like fun, and it seems so bizarre to just like love my life, but it was a lot of hell working in newsrooms. And people are very shocked when they hear that. Oh, like this national broadcaster, it was like that. And I said, yeah, read chapter 10. It's all there.
Yes, Alanis someone told me some stories inside the NFB, and it was the same. The difficulty to establish the voice and the perspective of Aboriginal people that was easily discarded as exaggerated, as mainly inconvenient to be shown or aired, and this is often the same difficulty. And we see that Radio-Canada, by telling the story of Aboriginal women in Abitibi, now they are on trial, so they are intimidated when they try to tell inconvenient truths that the system doesn't want to be heard. Yeah. And also we are speaking about how words is important, and also what you said connect to something very recent, because we were speaking of there is a great Aboriginal leader in Quebec called Richard Kistabish, is Anishinaabe, and he always finish his speeches by telling, do one thing important, do one thing very important. And this may seem small, but this is a big step. Give your child Indigenous names. And Alexandre did it recently also. But you take no chance. You give 3 Indigenous names to your son.
Me?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want me to tell you about them, or? Yeah.
Yes.
So, the whole story is very, it's a story. So I won't get into that for privacy reasons. But so my son's first name is Namawan, which is in his Anishinaabe language. His dad is Anishinaabe. His dad is from Sagin. And that means fair wind. And the reason why I chose that name is because everyone wanted me to name my son something that meant warrior. And I just thought, I don't want my son to be fighting his whole life. That's hard. We shouldn't have to have that. And so I wanted to name him something that was about justice and just peace. And his second name, Lacha, in our language means sky or heaven. And I just really liked that name. And then his third name it's actually Jacoda. And that's where I won't get into the nuances of that. So before I gave birth, one of my elders in my East Van Indigenous community, Salem, he's Liwat. He said, if your son is born after the first snow, I think it's after the first snow or before the first, I think it was after the first snow, his name will be Shakota, which means winter dance. And so I blended the J with the J-Coda, but in my heart, it's Shakota, but on the birth certificate, it's J-Coda. Yeah.
The Alexandre Namawan for bon vent, does it ring a bell in Quebec?
What's his name again?
Namawan.
Namawan. I think we would say in Atikamek, Mirwe quelque chose. Là. Attends. But I just got the word right at the tip of the tongue, but I can't. Bon vent.
Ouais, fair wind, mais ça pourrait être vent constant, vent favorable.
Mirwao.
It also means, so Fairwind was the name of a chief. So it actually also means water drum. So it actually has a whole, most of the names that I give people have stories behind them. So the story of Namawan was the story of a chief who was very lonely. And I met the descendant of Namawan who was explaining this, and he was very lonely, and he had a vision, or an ancestor came through and said, this is what you need to do, and then you will never be lonely again. So it was build this drum with like bones and all these different elements all over the drum. And I don't know how it happened, but people from all over the world would come to see this drum. So the chief was named Namawan. So it means fair wind, but it also is the telling of the story about a drum. Or the making of a drum for connection.
I don't know a word for a water drum in Atikamek. I'm not sure that we have that in our culture. But for fair wind, I would say wow. It's like vent léger, comme on dit en anglais.
Yeah.
Small wind. Like.
Yeah, light wind.
Yeah. Wow. It's like a good wind, but a small, not too strong.
Oh, I love that.
And his son is named Atsukan, which means story.
Story, legend, or.
Cool. I love that. Beautiful.
Yeah. But I don't know the exact name in Mohawk, but I know warrior in Mohawk. It's long like that. But if you translate it literally, it means the one who carry the weight of the peace, the burden of the peace.
Oh.
So the contradiction is interesting because there is peace is the most important part of the name for a warrior.
Right. Oh, I love that. That's interesting. That's super interesting. Yeah, I've also heard the highest form of warriorship is the ability to love after betrayal, or after, every reason to make you not love, you still can love. I think that's Buddhist. So that's interesting. I never thought about it that way.
And in your book also, there is, of course, the importance of love, but the importance of forgiving. I don't know. Can you forgive me? I am not completely able to forgive.
Say that again?
Myself. I cannot forgive. Well, not now. And I am always impressed when people that have suffered a lot more than I did. And I've been through all those very, very difficult experience of abandon, of abuse, of violence. And at the end of the day, they say, I can forgive.
Well, I think people forget that forgiveness isn't about the perpetrator. It's about yourself. It's about letting go. And I think that's also like a huge part of being on this earth, is letting go of attachment, right? And forgiveness creates an attachment to that experience, or the illusion of attachment to that experience, and letting that experience continue to dictate your life. And so I don't think forgiveness is about the perpetrator. I think like I think for me, letting go is about really seeing people as, some people, some things I feel like are unforgivable. That doesn't mean you can't let go of the experience of what happened to you. Letting go of that. I've heard some people say, a connection between two people, for example, it creates a spirit of its own. I think of that as like experiences, stories, they create spirit, and letting go of that story, letting go of that spirit of that experience will help you on your path to be able to teach people, to be able to have compassion and courage and curiosity. But in terms of letting people off the hook for what they've done, or not ensuring that they're held accountable, those are two very different things. You know, just going back to what I said about like Weinstein and Nygaard, what they did is unforgivable in the sense that their crimes, I mean, I don't even know how they can be accountable for those crimes. But the experience of that is something that I think it's important to let go of that. It could take years, it could take minutes. It's different for every person. And how you do that is your journey and your journey alone. Yeah, I've forgiven a lot of people. And I think for me, it's about understanding people as deeply flawed individuals, and that we all are. We've all made incredibly huge mistakes in our lives. You can't go through this life without making some pretty significant mistakes, depending on how old you are. But you know, I've made them, and but I agree with you. Like, thinking about the nuns and the priests and the whole system of genocide, that is unforgivable. But the experience is something we can let go of, in that spirit of hanging on to ugliness, because I think that's how mistakes get repeated when we do that.
Thank you for those words of wisdom. Of course, we recommend people to read Unbroken. Is it the French translation coming? Do you know?
I haven't heard anything about that. I also haven't been out there pursuing it.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've had people offer, and I don't understand how those systems work. So I don't think there is. Mm-hmm. I think it's like somebody told me that they have to reach out to my publisher. So It's not like my publisher goes out there and solicits that. So I'm not sure. And it's not something I've been actively trying to find. Mm-hmm. But I hope so. I hope if there's interest, for sure.
I will certainly spoke to a couple of publishers I know, because I think here it will be more accessible for the many people, even if they understand English, find it here difficult to, because it's their second language. And I think this book deserves a larger audience, and it speaks about the realities we are facing here in Quebec, in the very same pattern, a colonial pattern. And also, before leaving, Angela, I would like to, for the audience of this podcast, to pay tribute to Scott Monaday, the great Kiowa writer who died last week. Again, we had the usual obituaries in the medias, and again, if it has been a writer of this importance, would have been white, there would have been a lot more papers and discussions and a lot more fuss about his disappearance. But, well, this is an interesting Indigenous story, so we mention it, and that's it. That's all. And he won. He was the first Aboriginal writer to have the Pulitzer Prize, which is really something, for The House Made of Down, which is a great novel, American novel. So we encourage people to read it, to discover it if you have not already. La Maison de l'Aurore in French, and Scott Monaday, a great North American indigenous writer who left for the spirit world last week. So that's it for today. Thank you so much, Angela, to have shared those moments with us. And again, unbroken, you are for sure. We can feel it, we can see it. And we are certainly waiting to read your next work.
Thank you so much, André. And thank you for reading my book so closely. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You don't have, I just read the first pages and I was just taken for my whole book.
Wow, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay, bye-bye now.
Well, thank you.
Bye.
See you